Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity. Ordinary people, extraordinary creativity. Here's how to get unstuck. I'm your host, creativity coach Nancy Norbeck. Let's go. Terise Lang is a certified life, health, and wellness coach with a lifelong interest in and love of all things creative. She joins me today for a wide-ranging discussion of the power of creativity, including the way she uses creativity in her work, how creativity is so often socialized out of us in the name of more conformity, our tendency to define creativity too narrowly and then decide we don't have it, the hidden creativity in fields like software engineering and cooking, how managers unconsciously limit their staff's creativity while trying to foster it, the impact of artificial intelligence on our creative lives, and more. Here's my conversation with Terise Lang. Terise, welcome to Follow Your Curiosity.
Well, thank you, Nancy. I am excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this ever since we booked it. So,
me too. So start everyone with the same question. Were you a creative kid or did you discover your creative side later on?
I was creative from the jump and I had fun, lots of fun. Being creative, kids are creative anyway, but I just knew. I came alive whenever I did anything creative. That's with words, art, just doing things in quirky ways just to try them out,
Sure. So was there a particular thing that really drew you in as a kid, or was it pretty much across the board?
It was pretty much across the board. I did a lot of like drawing, painting. I wasn't great at it, but I enjoyed it. I liked looking at the colors. And my mom was artistically talented, and I also she taught me a little bit of the string arts. A little bit of
Ooh.
crocheting, knitting, that kind of stuff. I'm not good at it. I didn't stick with it, but I did do things like embroidery and also, as a family, like we would do these little silly little plays, like me and my siblings, right? We'd get together and we would just like a couple of times we would put a little play together, and my parents, God bless them, would sit there and watch what we put together, but it was fun. And I mean, we didn't have much, right? We were poor. But we were creative, right? And like we used bags. Hefty bags make fantastic capes, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
And boxes, and it was fun. It was just, that's what I like about it. That as an adult, you got to remember it can be fun to be creative.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's funny when you talk about making up shows and putting them on. I remember doing that as a kid. I'll bet an awful lot of people who are listening to this remember doing that as a kid. I think, probably more kids than not did something like that. It's not just the drawing and the writing and the music. It's the hey, let's put on a show, which is not just the cliched thing out of the movies from the 50s and 60s, right? Everybody is making up their own play and putting on their own show, even if it's just for your grandparents in the basement on Sunday afternoon, which is when we did it.
Poor grandparents. I have to give parents and grandparents a shout out here for sitting through those.
Oh, yeah.
But they were just enjoying being with their kids, right? And watching them play.
Right. And yet I'm also thinking it's so easy to be the adult, which you don't realize as a kid, sitting there going, oh, Lord, what do I have to sit through now? And yet what that kid is doing is amazing. And it's so easy to lose track of how amazing that is as an adult.
Isn't that the truth? It really is. Because we kind of, I call it getting socialized out of our natural creativity.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a point, there's a purpose for structure and guidance. But then, for goodness sakes, let kids dream and imagine. And those make the better innovators later on, right? It's just like any other muscle. The more you use it, the better you are at using it. And it's fun. I keep on emphasizing that because to me, that's what it's about, enjoyment. And it brings joy. It brings joy to you and whoever's enjoying whatever creative thing you're doing.
Right. And I think, When the creativity gets trained out of us, the fun gets trained out of us too. And I don't think we realize just how true that is until we manage to do something consciously or unconsciously. We end up in this situation where suddenly we're allowed to have fun again. And it feels kind of alien when we haven't done it for a while. And there can even be this sense of, kind of looking around the room like, am I allowed to do this?
Yeah.
You know?
It's what are people going to think? And,
Mm-hmm.
you have to get over that. What are people going to think? Well, they're going to think what they're going to think. You can be perfectly sensible and logical, and they're still going to think what they're going to think. So you might as well have fun being who you are.
Exactly. And who cares what they think? We're trained to care.
Well, you know what? The teenage years, though, are particularly precarious because you got the hormones going and, all the adolescent thing. Everybody wants to fit in, whatever. Not everybody, but most of them want to fit in. I knew some teens that I interacted with who they loved being different, It's like, I'm not like everybody else. Most of them, they want to fit in. And they get into that. And then, of course, when you go into the working world and you are given all these rules and these standards and you have to, and then it just, after a while, are you yourself or are you just a well-trained drone? And so that you know what I mean? You lose that. You don't lose it. You forget it. You kind of put it on the side, but you can bring it back out again. You can reactivate that. And it can change your life. It literally can.
And the trap is that you think you've lost it and you think it's gone forever. It's not. It's still in there.
It's dormant, temporarily dormant.
Right. You just have to realize that you can get it back and take the steps to do that and have the faith that it's still there, because it is. Yeah. It's sort of like, my high school French teacher always used to tell me that my high school French was still in my head somewhere. It's the same kind of thing. Like, you can get it back. And I look at French stuff every once in a while and I still recognize words. So I think she was probably right.
Absolutely.
It just takes the effort to go and bring that stuff back up to the surface. And it is an effort in part because you are fighting that training that has tried to turn you into the same widget as the person next to you at work. We are not widgets. We were never supposed to be widgets.
No. That kills everybody's unique. Right. And you don't want to lose that uniqueness. Everyone is unique. And, it can be a little scary, when people realize, oh, you're different. Maybe you're within a certain group and that group's pretty homogenous, right? And you've got everybody kind of feels the same way about something. But even then, each one of them feels uniquely similar about that thing. Right. It's like when you have a still life, they put it on the table, they'll have a vase and they'll have fruit, they'll have a piece of cloth, and you have a bunch of artists, and they're very good artists, but every single picture will be different.
Yes.
Right? Every one. And that's them using their perception and their creative take on it. And yet you can still recognize what it is, but it's with each one with their own creative flavor. I just love that. Recipes, I have a recipe for ginger cookies that I started out with like a basic recipe, and I'm like, I wonder if I did this and did that and did the other. And every time I make those things, they're kind of labor intensive, but people, they're just gone. I had a lady friend and she said, can I take a couple home? And I said, yeah. She said, I ended up taking like a dozen of them. So, because I was willing to say, you know what, I wonder if I did this or did that. And you know what? Kitchen disasters happen. So what? If you try a recipe and it's not, who cares? Who cares? On the other hand, you might have discovered something you really enjoy, especially, in my field, when it's healthy and enjoyable, right?
Right.
And you were willing to just try a different combination, go crazy, put pepper and something in there,
Right.
So.
Right. People don't realize, and I've said this before on this show, how creative cooking is.
Yeah.
Baking you have to be a little more precise with, or your cake is probably not going to rise.
Yeah.
But cooking you can really play with.
Yeah.
And I have known people who will walk into the grocery store and see some ingredient that they've never seen before and pick it up and say, I'm going to take this home and try it, and maybe walk over to somebody, especially like at an ethnic grocery store, and say, what is this and how do you cook it? Ask a couple
Exactly.
questions, go home and just play with it and end up with something amazing, which I frankly think is magic, because
It
I don't
is.
think I could do that. But some people have that particular talent to just make something out of something they've never seen before.
Or just a natural curiosity that they want to
Right.
satisfy, and it works out,
Right. And so, you can do that. And you could end up with a disaster the first time, but it could be that you were intrigued enough that you're going to go try it again. I
Exactly.
mean, there's all sorts of stuff that you can do in a kitchen. Those famous chefs you see on TV didn't get there because they opened up their Betty Crocker book and stuck to the recipe every time.
Absolutely. They would not be where they are because they
No.
would be like like a cookie cutter cooker, right?
Right.
Exactly like everybody. Yeah. And anyway, so I think, yeah, that's fun to me. Is trying different things in the kitchen that are healthy and yet they taste good. And I like the using different colors, like when they have the bell peppers and you use the different color bell peppers. It's so pretty.
Hmm.
And even when I go into a produce area, you see all the different colors, and I can see why a lot of artists get inspired, to draw them or whatever. They're visually appealing.
Sure.
And and a lot of times I tell people, just start with something simple. Yeah, just start with something simple.
Hmm.
Just try, if you kind of, as my husband, he used to draw a lot, and he says he hasn't done it in a while. And I said, you still got hands. By the
Yeah.
grace of God, you got hands and eyes. And, I said you can start with something like use pastels or something, not like oil paints or water paints, even more tricky because it runs down.
Hmm.
But just try a design, just sketch something out, So I got him a sketch pad for Christmas. Hey, go ahead and sketch it. And what's the worst that can happen? He doesn't like what he draws, they draw something else.
Hmm.
And those coloring books, right? Those that are, meant to relax, but nobody colors those the same way. That's
Right.
the creativity, right? You're going to take a flower or a floral kind of design and just do different things, different color palettes, right? And it just opens every time you do something like that. For one thing, you're using a little more of your brain, right?
Hmm.
And so it does like I know some tech people. Oh, I'm technical. I'm not creative. Um, you're a software engineer. You are incredibly creative. You are creating things that have never been done before. I
Right.
mean, right? Games and or just processes that go through a system that's never been set up before. That's called creativity. You know,
Right.
that's and that came from your curiosity of if I want to do this and I want to end up with that result, what do I do? You have to be creative. And then too, I like creative teams. Like you might have somebody who's got a strength in one area and someone has a strength in another area, and they combine forces, you know?
Right.
And that's when you really get, to me, brilliant ideas. But it doesn't have to be anything fancy. You don't have to be, there are not, like John Singer Sargent. I don't know if you're familiar with
Hmm.
him, but his portraits, I like his portraits. Well, a lot of people drew people, but they didn't look at all like that. Toulouse-Lautrec, completely
Right.
different. Pablo Picasso, completely different,
Hmm.
you know? And they distinguished themselves by just, they drew what they saw and they just let it happen. And some I love the paintings too that show motion. That's miraculous.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
all you have is a piece of paper and you just made it move. So anyway, you can tell I can go.
I
But
know. We could go on forever. But
yeah.
and I want to go back for a second to what you were saying about software engineers, because I interviewed a couple of years ago a friend of mine from high school who is a software engineer, and that's part of the reason that I had him on the show, because obviously it's a creative thing, and I worked in tech support for a long time. And you cannot be a good tech support person And in recent years, I've had my more than my fair share of encounters, it often feels, with people who are in tech support now who don't seem to understand this, without being curious and creative about solving a problem. You cannot just go through a flowchart of
Mhm.
standard questions and not put any thought into it and not, ask questions and be curious and make an effort to try to figure the thing out. I mean, to me, it always felt like a personal challenge. Why is this thing not working right for this person?
Right.
Any
Right.
kind of problem solving is inherently creative if you hope
Creative.
to actually solve it, unless it's
Right.
something that's really obvious that's come up 1,000 times before.
And they've
And
already automated a process, or they can show you what they did.
right,
But then again, you might be the person who they show you that and they go, "Oh, that's great, but I have a way it might work better."
right.
So even if it's established, that person might say, "You know what? We did something like this over there, but we saved time by doing
Mm-hmm.
such and such." You
Yeah.
know, because they were willing to be creative and look at other ways of doing it. So anyway, I didn't mean
Yeah.
to
No, it's
interject.
okay. But it's just like all of those things, when people like that tell me that they're not creative, drives me nuts. I mean,
Yeah.
my
It
father is an
does.
engineer. You cannot tell
Oh,
me that engineers are not creative, especially because he he's a lifelong choral singer. He's part of the reason that I ended up becoming a lifelong choral singer. And I will tell you, and we talked about this on the last show, there were so many engineers in my college choir that it was kind of mind boggling. There is a huge overlap between engineers and musicians. And my dad is also, it turns out, a great floral arranger. There is not this split that people seem to think there is between, oh, you're an
yeah.
engineer, you are, just purely left-brained. That's not how it
Mhm.
works.
Yeah.
It's not how it works. And
Yeah.
so, I would love it if people stopped thinking that you're either all or nothing, left brained, right brained. And I know that the brain science doesn't strictly work that way anymore, but that's how most people think of it. So that's what we're going with here. But, like, nobody is all or nothing. You have a left brain and you have a right brain, and they work together, and so do you. You know, that's how it is. If you solve any problem during your day, whether it's, oh, I started this recipe and it turns out I don't have the cumin, so what am I going to do instead? Or I need a better filing system in my job at work where I'm an office manager. You are being creative. You are coming up with something new. It's like you said before, you're creating something that didn't exist before. So give yourself the credit for being creative, please. Please stop defining yourself out of your own creativity.
Yeah, and I agree with you when you were talking about like a filing system. I remember hiring a guy that we hired him to do filing. We showed him what we had set up. In in 10 minutes, he had figured out a better way to do stuff. 10 minutes because he didn't go in there thinking, okay, I'll do exactly what I'm told and I'm not gonna go outside
Yeah.
the line. He just said, oh, boom. And like my boss didn't believe it. I said, 10 minutes, he's already got it working better in there. So and that to me is I remember that because I said, this is a creative guy, and he was creative. He was magical in the kitchen, by the way, with like a pastry, which is not easy to cook. And but that's because he would do things and he'd go, wow, he would like put designs and stuff, and you'd have a simple thing like a muffin, and he would make it look like, something you'd serve the queen. And I just loved it. I just loved it. So much fun to see that, and fun to see the look in his eyes. This is spirit enhancing. I mean, when you are in that creative mode and acknowledging that you're in that creative mode, right? Permitting yourself. It's like, wow, the world, your corner of the world suddenly got bigger. It
Mm-hmm.
suddenly opened up, and it just feels good. And that's how you know you're in that mode. It feels like, wow, this is, and it doesn't have to be the only thing you do. Maybe
Right.
you're a good mathematician. I know someone amazing mathematician, and boy, can he play a piano. And
Mm-hmm.
you can kind of see the intersection there, though, right? The
Yes.
counting and but he's just, but he creates his own musical pieces. So you know what I'm saying? That's not mathematical. That's just being creative and enjoying it. So, and I love to see people enjoy stuff. I do, you
Yeah.
know.
I think that's a flow thing too. People who improvise music, I think, tap into a flow state that I would love to understand more. Because that
Mm.
looks like magic to me too, and I don't necessarily think that it is, but it's a whole level of operation that I I say that, and yet, I've had moments of flow when I'm writing that are probably pretty similar, but because it's music, it just seems more magical to me somehow.
Yeah, and to people who do not enjoy writing at all, what you do seems magical. I'm
Right.
telling you, when I'm writing, it's like, oh, I'm glad you're doing that. I hate writing. And because it's not for everyone. Like I
Mhm.
love words. I love writing. To me, it's like, ooh. And some people they cringe. I'll tell you something that I don't know if my creativity could be improved in this area, but I'm not good with the sense of direction at all.
Mhm.
And my husband, he said you just need to work at it, and I'm better at it. He's amazing. You could put him in another country, spin him around with a blindfold on, and he could find his way. I've never seen, and he doesn't think he's very bright. I'm like, that's a high level skill. And he will figure out 4 or 5 different ways, which is to me being creative, of getting to a point, of getting from point A to point B. And I wish people would recognize that what they have is a gift, and recognize the scope of their gift and stop limiting it. You might have a wider scope tomorrow.
Right. Right. And as you're saying that, I'm flashing back to moments as a kid where I think, with the best intentions in the world, people hear a kid saying something like, oh, but I'm really good at this. And they immediately shut it down because they don't want the kid to get a swelled head, big ego, whatever. And
Mhm.
yet, like, I understand that impulse, but at the same time, it teaches that kid to devalue their own talent. And
It
that's
does.
how we end up with people who think that they're not creative or that they don't have a fabulous sense of direction and don't give themselves credit for their particular talents. And I think somehow we need to strike a better balance there. Like, you
Yeah.
don't want the kid who's walking around bragging about their skills all the time
Right.
because
But
there
there's
are
there's a
downsides.
happy medium. There
There's got
is
to
a happy
be.
medium where they have wonderful self-esteem, where they like who they are, they love who they are, they know that they have, special talents, and
Hmm.
yet they don't put other people down or make them feel
Right.
uncomfortable if they don't have that same kind of thing. And there is a way to do that. It's work, right? It's
Right.
it's like anything else. But that it's very easy to go into the, like you said, one or two,
Hmm.
left or right. you know
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's easy, but is it enjoyable? I mean, does it give you dimension in your life?
Right. Right. We all need to be better, I think, at taking credit for the things that we do well. And ironically, a lot of the people who tend to want to grab credit for things often don't really deserve it.
Yeah, there's that side of it too. Yeah. And you
Yeah.
go, okay. That obviously that's their perception. You may not share it, but
Right.
yeah, but I
Right.
know what you mean. I do know what you mean. And then I don't know, to me, if you want to have joy in your life, real joy, then you need to explore all you can about yourself and about the world around you. And creativity is a way to do that.
Hmm.
Going, being curious about things, asking questions. And sometimes you ask a question, like when I visited London one time, and I asked this guy about a building, He knew the whole dang history of that building, who had built it, when he had built. I had no idea that he had that in him. But I think part of creativity is being willing to reach out and ask questions. And, I tell people, I don't care if you think I'm dumb for asking a question. I'm going to ask it. Or if someone says, well, didn't I tell you that before? Uh-huh. I need you to remind me because I don't remember. So what was the
Mm-hmm.
answer? And by being curious and by being just wanting to live your life fully. I mean, why? Life is tough enough, right? We got plenty of
Mm-hmm.
challenges. Don't need to go into that. So why not, when you have the opportunity to explore and to learn and to broaden yourself? It's, whether or not you can do the thing that you discovered, you might find, I don't really have that. I remember trying to make one of those dream catchers and the Native
Mm-hmm.
American thing. And this one lady was Jickle. She could just, I mean, in like 15 minutes, she had this beautiful, rather intricate design. And I was doing everything but swallowing string trying to follow her. But you know what? If I were to stick with it, right, and work with it. But I'm still curious about, I was curious about the meaning of the dream catcher and also the variety and the beauty of people who create them. So I didn't lose anything by exploring it at all. And I met wonderful people too. So
Right.
there's all that opportunity. I hate to see people miss opportunities and to not have everything that they can, whether or not you have money. I mean, some people have more, some people have less. That's not the point. The point is, how rich is your life? And
Mm-hmm.
by being creative, by being allowing yourself to be creative, allowing people to be creative around you. Look how your world, I guess I got that from my dad because he was always exposing us to things that, from we couldn't travel there, but he taught us about other cultures. And I will never be able to thank him for that. That's a gift. So
Absolutely. And that's part of why, I think curiosity and creativity overlap so much. I don't think you can. Now I feel like I'm going to make a blanket statement and I shouldn't do that. But I was going to say, I don't think you can be creative if you're not curious. I think there's so much that that is fueled by curiosity in the creative world. You've got to be asking questions. You have to be wondering about things in order for that creative spark to get the fuel that it needs to produce whatever kind of creative thing you want to do, which is,
exactly.
why I titled this show Follow Your Curiosity, because it's easier to follow
Absolutely.
curiosity. You can't really follow creativity, but you sure can follow curiosity.
You can,
So,
and
yeah.
I don't ever regret being curious about things and asking and watching people do things. And when I was in New York, I saw this guy do this painting, and I've never seen painting like that. I'm like, what are you using? What's your medium? And he pointed to this can of stuff, and he said, I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's my own proprietary formula. But it looked like he was painting with titanium steel, where you have all
Wow.
those different, that's what I'm saying, all those different colors that manifest. Amazing. Because I guarantee you, he's a creative person. He
Hmm.
allowed himself. He probably thought, well, everybody's working with this and that. I'm going to try this. And he might have had, I don't know, 20, 50 bombs before he got it right. But I've never seen anything like that before or since. So, and that was a gift to me to see. That's like, wow.
Hmm.
So,
Sure. Well, and it sounds to me like your parents really encouraged your creativity and your curiosity, which is a huge
yeah.
gift too.
Yeah, they did. They did. Or let's say it this way, they didn't get in the way. They let me they let me do my creative stuff, and they're both creative too. And it took me a while well, my mom was always, like I said, she was sculpting, she was painting, she was, doing the string arts and all that, and very creative in the kitchen. Oh, what a cook. And my dad was more the cerebral person, but he was always reading about people he didn't know about, and he was always looking into different philosophies, and he was always and he took us to as many like free or community arts things. So he was always exposing us to different creative things. So he had that yearning, I think, for
Hmm.
that kind of creative stuff. and because he was always curious too. So maybe it's I have the curiosity gene or the
I think so.
creativity.
And you got a lot of exposure, which is great.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, how did all of that lead you to what you're doing now?
Well, I'm telling you right now, it has everything to do with what I'm doing now. I specialize as a life health and wellness coach. I specialize in tapping routines, but and there's a standard procedure.
Mm-hmm.
Mine's a little different again because I looked to see what was like. I tried it on myself, of course, and then with others. Others did it with me. And I found that some things were working better than others. And so that's where the creativity came in. I do it a little differently and I ask more questions before and after the process. And when I do it, I always ask them, okay, I do one round and I go, yeah, how did that feel? We do calibration at the beginning and the end. And if they don't feel any difference, then I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it again. But so far, they've all gotten results in the first round, and I think it's because I was willing to look at slightly different ways of doing it. And also when it comes to just figuring out different ways to give messages to people who, let's say if you're going to talk to them about eating right. And, like I'm in Atlanta, which is, it's the southern foods that they eat, most of it that puts them in the hospital. So
Mm.
how do you talk to people, right? About, yes, these foods are tasty and they're traditional and you associate them with family. There are creative, healthy ways of cooking that stuff where you still have basically the same kind of menu, but it's done in a healthier way. And by creating some, I said, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? And without spending extra money, if sometimes you got to spend, you got to invest a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of thing. And also just when it comes to um, when I'm writing my newsletters and I'm thinking about different topics and how I want to present them in a way that people will understand. They'll get some value out of it, and they won't feel talked down to. So people don't want to be, oh, you lecture to, you should do this and you're doing that wrong,
Yeah.
because that's not fulfilling. That's not life enhancing. But if they can learn and go, and I invite questions. And I found that being willing to look at their specific take on it and maybe expand it a little bit, that kind of creativity has worked for me. So,
Could could you go back a little bit and
mhm.
explain what tapping is? Because I
Yeah.
don't think it's ever come up on this show before, and I don't know if
Oh,
everybody knows what that is.
okay. So it is a method actually being used by a lot of counselors and some medical doctors now. It's based on science. You have a small little organ, or a small little piece by the pituitary base of the brain called the amygdala, and it's kind of an emotion center. And so what you do, and I kind of compare it to when you're in the womb and you feel your mother's consistent heartbeat, how comforting that is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you tap different points of the body. There's like 9 different points that you tap. And actually there's more than that, but there's like a basic set. And you're tapping along meridians or energy lines in the body, similar to when you have acupuncture, right? You know how they use those meridians. Well, it's similar to that. And you're tapping, and when you're tapping, you're calming that's emotion center down. And then you start with what you want to improve, what you want to have, what you want to take care of, and you do several rounds, and then you go into um, uh, you start with the negative, what you want to straighten out. Then you go with affirmations, and you keep repeating. And when you tap on these points, it calms you down. And I think what happens is when you allow your body to calm down and your mind can work in the best way that it can, you start to see things differently. When you start to see them differently, you think differently, you feel different. And they usually say, I feel different than when I started this. So it's very powerful. And I always recommend you just work on one issue at a time. You just focus on the one. And I've done it half an hour, basically, usually. and it's very effective. And when I have something that I have to deal with, and I notice myself getting all upset, breathing exercises are fine. And sometimes I start with that, but then I do the tapping routine. And it's interesting too because it has a healing component that I hadn't recognized. Because this lady, at the end of a session, she said, "I've had a pain in one of my wrists for 6 years, and it just went away." So it was
Wow.
associated with some emotional thing that she had going. I Now that we weren't even focusing on that, right? So it's powerful, and I love to use things that where you use your own mind and body, and you use as little external, especially like when it comes to medicines and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now don't go off your medicines. Sometimes you have medicines for specific conditions,
Right.
but when you can do something naturally that works with and that is a true mind and body exercise. So is writing, just like when you
Mm-hmm.
journal and you're not only thinking, but you're writing. It's kind of similar to that. So that's what tapping is. And I've done several, every time I do it, I leave it open to will it work or will it not? See, that's another thing. Because if it doesn't, that gives me an opportunity to see what can I do differently to make it more effective. So I never stop being willing to be creative in how I do something. And that has allowed me to find some pretty effective methods. So I hope that explains
Yeah. Yeah.
basically.
It's something that I've heard of and used off and on for probably, I don't know, 20 years now, but I don't know how well known it is. I've heard more
Mhm.
people mention it recently, so I think maybe it's getting out there. It's one of those things that for me there's, a category of things that I kind of falls into the I don't know if this works or how it works, but it tends to make me feel better, so who cares?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, the overthinking, honest to Pete, I think it calms down overthinking. I really do. I think there are things you can do that calm down your overthinking because I'll be the first to say I've done plenty of overthinking
Oh
in my
yeah.
life, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
I have been a champion overthinker, as many people who know me could tell you
ooh,
if
a
I don't tell
champ.
you first. Yeah, if nothing else, it's a great way to, take a break from
Exactly.
whatever pattern of overthinking is happening for you
Exactly.
and kind of, do something that grounds you in your body and gets you out of that at least briefly so that you can kind of
Exactly.
step back and breathe and with luck, maybe the first time or the second time you go through it, you're able to step back and say, okay, I can look at this differently, or I can go do something else for a while and then I can come back to it in a
Right.
better spot to deal with this other thing. Either one, like I said, I'm not arguing. They're both beneficial.
Exactly. And sometimes, just sitting in a chair, just doing nothing, just for 10
Mm-hmm.
minutes or so. Just, no rules, no pressure, and then go back to work because it clears you. You don't want to like study, for instance, more than 45 minutes. Then you take 15 minutes for your mind to process it. Otherwise, you're not even going to learn that much.
Yeah.
So. The mind is one of God's incredible gifts, and we can do so much with it, so much, and being aware, of our body and our mind. So yeah, I love doing stuff that when I can see the results in someone, it's like yay. Because well, you
Yeah.
don't do stuff to not have any impact. It's like, what's the point? You've wasted the person's time, and time is precious. That's the thing
Mm-hmm.
you can't get back, can't buy back.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Yeah. And I think it's so fascinating, when you're talking about needing to take a break, especially in American culture, it's kind of drilled into us that we should never need a break because we're like machines and we're not machines.
No.
And
America
thinking that
and
we
Japan,
are
America
is
and Japan in particular, they are known for that. And
yeah.
and and also known for an incredible amount of stress-related illnesses.
Yes.
It's not worth it. But
No.
taking time out to do something creative, maybe get one of those coloring books and,
Mm-hmm.
take a 10-minute break and just start coloring in. It calmed you down and made you happy when you were a kid. You of course you've matured, but that feeling alive, and colors are also therapeutic. So it's
Mm-hmm.
just, so you have the mind body thing where you're actually drawing and the colors and you can see the picture forming. How can that not make you feel like you are creating something?
Right.
And then if you go back to, if what you were doing was creative and you kind of hit a wall for a minute, it'll kind of loosen that up. And I mean, I see no downsides to doing something like that.
No. No. And there is always the option to deliberately make something bad
Yeah,
and get out of your own way that way.
yeah, yeah.
Just, I mean,
Turn off that critic. You know that
correct.
critic.
And
You know that critic.
as I've said to people, like, maybe you don't have a coloring book or colored pencils or anything like that handy. Maybe all you have is a couple of paper clips and a scrap of paper. That's plenty.
Oh
You can
yeah.
still make something out of that. It doesn't have to be good. It can be funny. It can be strange. It can, you don't have to understand it, but as long as you're willing to make something out of it,
That
you've
reminds me of
succeeded.
that reminds me of when I was creating a wardrobe of paperclip jewelry. Like I had earrings, necklace, bracelet. I thought this is cool. But that's it's the creative process. It is the process, and allowing the process allows you to, it's not just one thing. You can,
Mhm.
once you get into the habit of being creative, allowing it, permitting yourself, that's a very important thing.
Right.
Permit yourself to be creative, then you are more creative. I mean, you are tapping into it. It was always there, but
Right.
it wakes it up. If you give yourself, it's always there. You give yourself permission to use it, and then don't forget to enjoy it because
Yeah.
it's fun. It can be fun, you
Yeah.
know.
And I have to ask you now because you mentioned making jewelry with paper clips, and
Yes.
I had not thought of this since I was a kid. So it's a long time. But I remember making necklaces and bracelets out of paper clips and wrapping them with like contact paper or something. Is this similar to what you did? Because I have not thought about this in like 40 years.
No, I didn't use the tape, but I had, and there's not only that, but I had paper clip necklaces of different lengths, of course, so that it looked
Mm-hmm.
really fancy. No, I didn't do that, but and then I remember making sculptures out of those oversized butterfly clips. If you
Oh, wow.
when you see, I was creative, but like I said, I indulged in it. I
Mm-hmm.
indulged in it, and I guess I've been very fortunate that I didn't have anybody crush that,
Yeah.
because when you were young and impressive, and even if you get older and someone says, "Oh, act your age," well, maturity is one thing. Being as creative as you want to be, using some of that childlike imagination and so forth, is another. It doesn't take away from you, you
Right.
know.
Right. Right. What does act my age mean? I mean, I can be 53 and still want to make stuff out of paper clips. What's wrong with that?
Absolutely. Well, people doodle their whole lives.
Right.
They sit at meetings and doodle. Doodling's wonderful. It's
Right.
fun.
Right. My mother whistles all the time to the point
Does
where
she?
my father jokes that if he loses her in a store, he just listens until he can find her that way. I
Exactly.
mean, and she's almost 80.
I see nothing wrong with that at all.
Right. There's
It's
nothing
fun.
wrong with that.
Yeah.
Except for the part where she might get mad that I just said how old she is. But I
Yeah.
really don't think, none of that is attached to an age. And I don't think that act your age is an insult with any of it. If I want to go make a snow angel at my age, I am acting my age. So there.
Exactly. 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 Absolutely. Whatever brings you joy that doesn't hurt other people. Basic,
Right.
nice and basic thing. Doesn't hurt you, doesn't hurt someone else, and it brings you joy, relaxation. It brings you peace. Any creative thing that does that for you, I am so for it.
Right.
And you have happier, if you manage at a business or something, you have happier employees. If
Mm-hmm.
they are allowed to bring their creative ideas to the table, you don't shut them down. You might say, well, that might not work, or, we've tried that and it didn't work, or we might have to look at it a different way. But if you allow them to bring that up and they know they have the freedom to do it, it
Right.
won't shut down their natural creativity at work, right? And
Yes.
you have better, happier staff. I keep saying, folks, stop getting in the way of your own happiness or the happiness of people you work with
Mm-hmm.
or meet or encounter. And maybe their style's different from yours. So,
Right.
you
Right.
know,
There is something really wild about asking your staff to be creative, telling them they need to be more creative, and then when they are, stomping on it every single time. And
yeah,
I've
yeah.
seen that happen, and it's just like, do you
Oh
listen to
no.
yourself?
Oh
Like, what do
no.
you think you're
That's
doing?
Yeah, because then fear enters into the picture.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be, I don't want the boss calling me out for something bad, or there's a punishment of some kind. I won't get that promotion. They won't see me as valuable on the
Right.
team. It should never be that way. You invite the creative ideas. You invite them. You say, well, some we may use, some we may not. But if you use someone's unique, idea, then acknowledge them for it. We got
That
this
too.
idea from Nancy. She came in and she had that idea. Other people will think, oh, you know what I'm saying? They'll be more apt to indulge in the creative process because instead of being punished or called out for it in a bad way, they'll be acknowledged for, and you just thank people for their ideas, period, right?
Mm-hmm.
Period. And then say, well, some we can see working and some we may not, or we may try it later. But if you do an absolute shutdown, and that reactivates the memory of when you were little and you had it
Mm-hmm.
shut down, like I said, act your age. Oh, your imagination is just too wild, too crazy. You have to be sensible. You have to, and yes, there's room in my life for I have pretty high logic skills. So I love being creative too. That doesn't
Yeah.
cut it up, there's room for all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Our brain's big enough to hold all that.
Yeah. There are two things that I'm hearing in what you're saying. I mean, one is that I think a lot of people in management positions define, like, their definition of creativity is really narrow. We
Narrow.
want something creative, but we only want something that's new and different within this very small margin. And if you've gone beyond that very small margin, that makes us very nervous and we don't like that and we're going to shut it down. And also, and that confuses the people who hear it as, oh, let's do big things. But also that importance of acknowledgement, because I've also been in places where the supervisor gets the credit, not the person who
Uh,
actually came up with the idea, which is really discouraging for that
that is one of
person.
my pet peeves. You know what? I did emphasize that on a job. I said, think about it. If someone you manage has been managed in a way that they've been encouraged to be creative and come up with this idea, it makes you look good as their manager
Mm-hmm.
because you're growing and developing your staff and they're happy.
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
I
But if
mean,
you take all the credit for it, it makes them feel terrible and like they don't count and like you
ugh,
don't appreciate them. So, yeah, it's 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 the easiest thing in the world to give credit where it's due and make everybody feel like they're appreciated. It
yeah,
doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to
nothing.
go and get fancy, little awards and things like that. You just give them acknowledgement in front of other
Acknowledgement.
people. And
Yeah.
yet, so many people don't seem to understand that.
And you increase cohesion
Yeah.
because when people think it's safe. It's safe
Mm-hmm.
to be creative. It's safe to come up with ideas. And if you do come up with one that they use, it is safe because you know that you will be acknowledged and somebody won't be,
Right.
it's a, that makes, that is what grows companies, really.
Yes.
That grows companies. Everyone's like, it's about the bottom line. Yeah, but you don't get to the bottom line until you look at your people, for goodness
Right.
sakes.
There's all sorts of stuff above that bottom line that goes into that bottom
The bottom
line.
line.
And if you only look at that bottom line, you will ignore all sorts of important things above it.
And miss opportunities,
Yes.
you know? And it's like, what's the point? Anyway, so yeah, that's kind of, you can tell that creativity pretty much rules how I do things and run things. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it definitely does. And with good reason. With very good reason. I think, it kind of gets back to what we were saying before about, defining creativity too narrowly and people defining themselves out of their
Yeah.
creativity. People think that creativity just means the arts, and sometimes they think it just means specific parts of the arts, but it really is in everything. And if you don't account for it in everything, as you've said multiple times here, you will miss opportunities. You will miss things that could affect that bottom line. You'll miss things that will affect your joy, which I think is
Mm.
something we don't have enough of because we don't give joy enough credit and importance either. Like all of these things are part of a giant multi-layered overlapping Venn diagram. And we
It sure
tend to
is.
think that only certain pieces of that diagram are important and ignore the rest of it. And it's not
Mm.
it's not helpful when we do that.
No, it isn't. Not at all. On the other hand, the joy and the growth when when you do it right, when you do allow people to be who they are and creatively express who they are and come up with their creative ideas and let them dress. I mean, within certain limits. You don't want someone coming in with their birthday suit, but let them dress, let them dress, in a way that like I've seen people, have you ever seen that where you see a woman in an outfit and she looks stunning? You would look like a shipwreck in it. But on her, it's
Yes.
absolutely stunning, right? Because it's
Yes.
her style and it fits her creative expression.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same thing. It's like if you said no, you have to wear this gray suit because it is the way. Now it's different if you're flying for the airline. You've got
Right.
uniforms so people can identify you in emergencies, so something like that. But if they're just wearing what makes them feel good, and it's a very different style from yours, but it looks fantastic. Then and I tell people, encourage people, tell them
Mm-hmm.
how good that looks. They may not have heard that because it's different, and some people, or they may have heard something negative because it was different. But
Right.
when you tell them, "Hey, I love that. That looks fantastic on you," then they're encouraged to continue being creative with their expression.
Right.
And then of course, like it's the way you are in one place is the way you are everywhere. So then she's going to take that into work and be more creative because she's just been told that her creativity is not only okay, but it's wonderful.
And that she's valued for who she is.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because I don't expect her to be me, and
Right.
she doesn't, and vice versa.
Right. Because we're not widgets. We're not widgets. We're not drones. We don't all have to be
Um,
exactly the same.
Exactly. And that's what makes for a rich world. It really
Right.
does. Have you ever seen a film called Metropolis, Fritz Lang's?
Oh, a
Uh,
long time ago.
yeah. And
Very long time
basically
ago.
they were talking about that, running people like machines and insisting that they are, and it leads to insanity. It leads to, and
Mm-hmm.
after a while, that person's spirit is going to rise up and say, no, that's not who you are, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I never forgot that film because I got the message, when I saw it. It may be old, but the concept was way ahead of its time.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking, it's funny. Like the Industrial Revolution is like mid-19th century, right? And
Exactly.
and it fascinates me that, the machines come in and we're human and the machines are supposed to do things to make things better for us. And yet somehow, even though the machines were sort of supposed to be servants, we elevated them because they can do all of this stuff. And suddenly we have to be like the machines, even though we're supposed to be better than the machines. And there's also this fear of we're going to be turned into the machines, which we see in all sorts of science fiction, starting probably with Metropolis. And it's never gone away. How many movies have come out in the last 10 years with the same kind of theme? And it's fascinating to me because
Yeah.
I think it's that drive that we have where our society keeps trying to tell us that we have to be more like the machines and we don't need to take breaks and we don't need to sleep and we don't need to rest and whatever. And we don't need to be creative, even though that's our big advantage over the machines, at least until they do something wild with AI.
Yeah.
And, so
Yeah.
there's reason for that fear because we're being driven to be more that way.
And I'm glad you brought up AI too, because I was going to say something about that. Obviously, it has uses. It has
Mm-hmm.
very good uses, but it's not a machine. I mean, it's not a person. It's
Right.
not a person. No, I don't care how advanced the code is. I don't care how well you query something. Yes, you can get information. You can get ideas generated. You can have it, do things like give you outlines,
Mm-hmm.
make suggestions. I've even asked it for, tell me some places where I can get citations for a certain subject. So it'll look it up quickly. Great. Say it's time. But it's not a person.
Right.
And so many times when I watch some of these videos and they have even though it's a highly advanced AI voice, after a while, it's interesting. The human brain can detect the difference.
Mm-hmm.
There are just certain pauses and nuances in human expression, creative human expression, thank you, that
Yeah.
appeals to us. It makes us more approachable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and AI it's not going to take over for human creativity. It isn't because it's wiping ideas that have already been produced. It's taking what's already there.
Right.
So it can be used as a tool, but you are not a machine. AI does what it does. Remember that as a human being, you uniquely and creatively can contribute what you do.
Yes. Yes.
Period.
And I think, you know, people are starting to think that AI is smart. AI is not smart. It's just taking data that's been fed into it and regurgitating it with the appearance of intelligence, but it's not actually intelligent. It's good at things like looking for patterns, and things like you
Right.
were talking about, but it is not actually giving you anything new. It alarms me that students now are using GPT as a search engine, which is not what it is. It
Wow.
can make up whole pieces of information. If you
The
look at Google,
hallucinations, yeah.
yeah, well, when you look at like the court cases where lawyers have used it and cited cases that don't actually exist, and
It
it,
will, in the absence of data, it will create. It will
right,
create people and things,
right.
events that never happened, people that never existed.
And that's alarming if
It's
kids are using it as a search engine. Lord only knows what it's telling them that they're assuming is true.
the only good
And
thing is that I notice they do have a caveat, and it says, that it can hallucinate. It says that to check your facts
yeah, but
because
those
it can
kids
make
aren't doing
mistakes.
that.
Oh, that's scary.
you
Yeah,
know,
that's
because
scary.
they don't know
Yeah.
any better. They don't have enough life experience to really understand the difference. And even, if you Google something now, you have to wade through the first result, which I'm sitting here making air quotes, is the AI overview. And you have to remember, it's like, don't even try to read it because your brain wants to read it because it's the first thing that's on the page. It's like,
Right.
no, this is probably nonsense. You got to scroll down to get actual results that will tell you actual information because that thing is nonsense.
Not only that, but I talked to a Google expert who said you do realize that some people pay more to Google, and therefore their posting or whatever their content
Mm-hmm.
will show up first. Doesn't mean it's the best. Doesn't mean it
Right.
answers your question. But if it's at all related to the topic, it'll put that first because that's the way their account is.
Right.
That to me is like, no, I want to look through for real resources of real information and still be creative when I find it. But
Right.
yeah, but yeah,
And
AI has thrown a little wrench into
mm-hmm.
the creative process.
And on top of all of this, it uses an immense amount of environmental resources.
Yes, it
So,
does. Yeah.
which I think a lot of people who are just suddenly using it for everything are forgetting. It's like, yes, it's saving you a lot of time and it's
Well,
using astronomical amounts of water and power, and
yeah,
it's
it,
not
it
it's
really
not
is.
free.
No. And the thing is, I guess I don't understand because that information's out there.
Mm-hmm.
That is incredibly, it's an incredible energy consumer. I what can I say? You can tell someone that, or you can tell them, be aware, read, find out, before you do something. Um, anyway,
Yeah, we
we
could
could
be
talk
here for
about
a
it. AI
whole
can be another whole thing, yeah.
another whole
But
episode.
but the point is, it doesn't create; it
Right. It does
regurgitates.
not.
Yeah,
And it doesn't feel the same when you use it. Even if you ask it to draft a brief thing for you, it may save you time. And for some things, for things I don't want to write, it's not the same. But there are things I want to write. And I know they're going to take me time, but I want to write them. There's something in me that needs to come out. And
exactly.
if
That
I
creative
ask,
expression.
right, if
Yeah.
I ask a machine to write it for me, it's not gonna be the same.
And they say, well, you train AI. Yeah, but you're once again, what you're doing is you're giving AI the patterns from what you do,
Right.
but it doesn't know you. It isn't you. The AI will
Right.
never replace you
And it
ever.
doesn't know
Thank
what
goodness.
I'm trying to say or how I want to say it. Even I don't necessarily know how I want to say it until I sit down to write it.
And I love it when it does the autocorrect. This would be better, but that's not what I wanted to say. If you
Right.
said it this way, that is not what I'm saying, because there are those tiny little nuances, things that take away from the context. That's not what I'm expressing. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I'll write something that it'll start with repetitively with the sentences on purpose because I'm emphasizing, and it'll say, well, that's not efficient. I'm not trying to be efficient. I'm expressing the
Going for a
emotion associated with what I'm
rhetorical
writing.
effect. And you can always tell, with there are certain terms that AI loves to use over and over again, and it loves its fancy adjectives that don't need to be there and stuff like that. And it's just like, oh, get out. The editor in me is just like, no, no, get out of here. This is a crappy piece
Well,
of writing.
the good thing is that it's just AI. You can just turn it off.
Right,
You can
right,
you can go someplace
right.
else and just write what you want to write.
And its
So
feelings won't be hurt if you take out all the crappy adjectives that don't need to be there.
I don't even care if I hurt AI. Well, too bad.
Right,
No,
right.
that's
It's a
that's
machine.
that's it's a machine. That's all. It's machine language. That's exactly what it
Yeah.
is. Created by someone who noticed patterns in words. For
Hmm.
instance, the letter E is used more often than others, and it went from there. And they've made a science out of it, which is interesting, and it has its applications. But it is, I mean, some people, when I heard they were using it for diagnosis, you better back that up with consulting with doctors who
Right.
actually know the human body, and they would know when there was a mistake. Because, like I said, in the absence of the specific data it's looking for, it'll just make it up.
Right.
And then it's like, what did that AI say? Well, that sounds close
Yeah.
enough. You don't want to do that with someone's health, right?
No, not at all.
And doctors can also, and that's how we have medical advances, by the way, folks, and scientific advances. They are creative in their problem solving,
Yes.
you know? They are
Yep.
creative in their problem solving. And it's like when COVID hit, and we were, oh my gosh. and they put their best minds together, and they were working with something they hadn't dealt with before.
Mm-hmm.
This was a totally new thing, absolutely devastating, worked very quickly. And they had to put they had to think outside the box. The whole thing was outside the box. Not even like outside the box but you get the basic idea. They
Yeah.
had to think in a different way to come up with something. And I imagine that the trials were, going through fast. And they did it though, but they did it by being willing to say, look, we just need to put our heads together and just, you know, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure that they did brainstorming. I mean, that's what you want to do brainstorming with.
Absolutely. And lots of collaboration. Get as
Lots of it.
many people in there thinking in as many different ways as possible to solve this
And that's
problem.
how they came up with it. Not, they didn't do Chat GPT. How do I solve the COVID?
Right, right. And I do worry a little bit that, ChatGPT is a little bit too much like the homework machine. And if we turn over too much of what we're thinking to ChatGPT, will we lose the ability to do the problem solving on our own?
Well, to me, if I were a parent of young kids, I would have them involved in some community projects where they work with real people and they put
Mm-hmm.
something together to keep
Yeah.
that, ability to work with the team and come up with hey, bat together some ideas and put something together, because that keeps that going. But if you only expose them to, their phone and the PC and the AI all day, and social media all day, then
Yeah.
you're doing them a disservice. You got to keep the creativity wheel going. And most kids like being creative.
Oh,
Let's
yeah.
face it. They love creative projects. I mean, did you ever see an art class that wasn't full? I mean,
Right.
right? Or not just art, music,
Mm-hmm.
and sports. When they're figuring out those plays, right? The ways to trick the other team so that you have an
Yeah.
advantage. That is creativity.
Well, and sports are great because you never know what's going to happen. You
No,
don't
you
know if
don't.
that play is going to work. You have no idea how it's going to go, and you have to react in the moment.
And you sure
So,
do.
yeah, your brain has to be flexible to respond to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
gymnastics, I mean, there are gymnasts who came up with moves nobody had done before. Again, creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And so in other words, we all benefit from it, societally, in our communities, our bodies, with our relationships. When is it not a good thing? So
Yeah, pretty much
yeah.
never. Yeah. So 1,000,001 uses because there's, millions of us out here figuring out what to do in any given situation every single day.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
it makes it interesting. It
it
really
does.
does. I mean, hopefully you're not trying to, avert you're not in the middle of a crisis and a disaster and all that, but just in a regular day where you just have the usual craziness. But I love exercising the creative muscle. I do.
Mm-hmm.
And coming up with something that works, and sometimes it doesn't, and it can be frustrating, but I'd rather be frustrated trying to come up with creative ideas than sitting up there and doing, okay, Chat GPT, tell me what.
Yeah.
You're not using your mind as much. And we have amazing this the mind is an amazing thing. Amazing. The brain is incredible with what it can do, so let's use as much of it as possible. Let's, like they always say, let's cure cancer. Let's see what we
Mm-hmm.
can do. As a matter of
Yeah.
fact, a lot of the work that they're doing now with the oncogenes, the genes that are, instrumental in breast cancer and so forth, that when I was working at American Cancer Society, I met some of the scientists, young scientists, who came in with new ideas that, oh, that's crazy. But it wasn't crazy, because now, I mean, they're using enzymes and so forth that are making a difference. And if you can do something that helps give people hope and more health,
Yeah.
or whatever the positive outcome is, sometimes it's just sheer enjoyment, you
Right.
know.
Well, I think this is a great place to end. And we could go on forever because I have really, really enjoyed this conversation. And I'm so glad that you came and talked with me today.
Well, I appreciate your inviting me, and I was so excited because I knew when I met you before, I said, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait to talk to Nancy on her podcast." And I can see why it has lasted. This has been very enjoyable. I appreciate the opportunity, and if anyone who was listening, keep coming back because this is a high quality podcast with a very good interviewer. I felt very comfortable and. I feel that people are being served on this podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's our show for this week. Thanks so much to Terise Lang and to you. Terise's links are in the show notes. I hope you'll leave a review for this episode. There's a link in your podcast app, and it's super easy and really makes a difference. If you enjoyed our conversation, please do share it with a friend. Thank you so much. If this episode resonated with you, or if you're feeling a little bit less than confident in your creative process right now, join me at The Spark on Substack as we form a community that supports and celebrates each other's creative courage. It's free, and it's also where I'll be adding programs for subscribers and listeners. The link is in your podcast app, so sign up today. See you there, and see you next week. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners.